There's that voice, that comforting voice. Hopefully you're here because you are interested in learning more about this program, the cohort that launched back a few weeks ago via GIA, and sort of what is this program supposed to be? What's it all about? And that's what we're going to walk through today. We're going to do about 20 minutes of what this is, how it works, why we're doing it, why GIA is resourcing it, and then allow a bunch of time for Q&A. So the goal is to make sure everybody leaves here with as much clarity as we can provide, and we're really grateful that you took the time to be with us today. So with that, I'm going to ask my teammates here to introduce themselves. Jen, can I put you on the spot to go first?
You can. Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Cole. My pronouns are she, hers. I, as of 2 weeks ago, am the new dean at the Pacific Northwest College of Art at Willamette University, which is in Portland. And I'm a longtime collaborator with Randy and Estrella on this intersection of racial justice, public sector work, and public policy. I'm the former chief cultural officer for the city of Nashville, which means I ran the local arts agency there for nearly a decade. And so I'm excited to see everyone here and really excited about this work that we are doing together.
Estrella, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Estrella Esquiling, and I'm joining everyone from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Also have been a collaborator of Jen's, and I just moved from Phoenix, Arizona, and was formerly at Arizona State University. And you'll see a little bit of continued ties of that original collaboration where we were able to kind of create the genesis of this idea together, and now we're all together still for this program. I'm happy to be able to share with you more about the program later on in the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Estrella and Jen, and hello, my name is Randy Engstrom. I live in Seattle, Washington, traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. I use he, him pronouns. I am the principal and co-founder of a collaborative consulting studio called Third Way Creative, and a recovering bureaucrat. I spent almost 9 years as the director of the Office of Arts and Culture for the city of Seattle. I am, in my heart of hearts, a policy nerd, and this work has been central to Jen and I's professional relationship and also personal friendship. It's weird to have a friendship around cultural policy and racial equity, but we do. And the focus of my practice is really at the intersection of public policy, creative economy, and racial equity. We are thrilled to have a village of brilliant humans who are helping us to create this program. We're very excited about this, but we know that no one can do it alone. And so the folks here on the screen, half of whom are Grantmakers in the Arts board members, who I'm really privileged to serve with. The other half, just people doing remarkable work in the field. All from all over the country. I think the only place that's not represented is New York, which is ironic, but Grantmakers in the Arts is in New York, so New York is at the table. But we tried to be very thoughtful about geography and positionality, people inside government, people government adjacent, because we wanted to have the most thoughtful perspectives that could inform a public policy program. Jen?
Why is this not working?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So as we began with this brilliant group of co-designers to kind of imagine what could a cultural policy sort of leadership training program begin to look like, one of the things we thought was very important is to situate that in a core belief system. And the reality is that we feel like most cultural policy in the United States, and Randy will talk about this in a while, has actually been sort of facilitated to support specific institutions rather than situating it at the human scale of fostering wellness, racial equity, and economic solidarity, civic narrative, and belonging. And we really believe that in order to make this shift in the core infrastructure of how policy has functioned in this country, particularly cultural policy, that it starts with people. It starts with centering artists and change makers that are rooted in community self-determination and imagination and the implementation of kind of new waves and new understandings of public policy. So this is really a program that seeks to acknowledge the structures of harm that have existed in our public policies, but more importantly, actually situates a space of collective imagination to imagine what other policy might look like if we actually made it human-centered and belonging and wellness-centered.
Thanks, Jen. So we want to set a little bit of framing about why public policy and cultural policy have a responsibility to work towards racial equity. And from a public policy, well, from both perspectives, we feel like it's because the conditions and the inequities that we see today are the direct result of policy choices that were made in the past. In this country, as most people on this call probably know, from indigenous genocide and chattel slavery to the Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese internment to the redlining that existed up through the 1970s and 80s, public policy in this country has created racial inequity. That's why cities like Seattle and others have had race and social justice initiatives, because they recognize their complicity in a system that extracted wealth from some communities and redistributed that wealth to other people. And so we're looking for policies that can mitigate that historical harm that's been done and create more justice and a more just distribution of resources. That is also true within the cultural sector. Grant making in this country was largely determined historically by budget size. It overwhelmingly privileged the white Western canon, emulating the cities of Western Europe. Going back to the birth of the National Endowment for the Arts, there was a matching grant requirement to a lot of their funding, as the Ford Foundation had done before that. That matching grant is lovely in principle, but also requires that the organization receiving the money have access to capital and resources. And if you've never been funded, how would you have that resource? Public art is often tied to infrastructure projects, which privilege neighborhoods that get more public investment. Historically, that's been more affluent neighborhoods. And public art portfolios are linked to previous projects. You're unlikely to get a public art commission unless you have a portfolio of public art projects, which means the sooner you started, the more successful you likely are. And there are ways to also interrupt those patterns. So both public policy generally and cultural policy specifically have a history of creating inequity, creating economic and cultural inequity. And that's what we hope this lab can pursue, is the remediation of both. So when we say cultural policy, what are we talking about? And so just a quick walkthrough of how we are defining cultural policy. I don't think this is meant to be the definitive. There actually is no definitive book about cultural policy in America. Quite interesting. But in the 1930s, we had the WPA. A lot of talk about the WPA these last few years, the Works Progress Administration, hiring artists directly to do work in their community, which was an amazing thing. In the 1960s, 1965, we saw the National Endowment for the Arts chartered under the Johnson administration, part of the Great Society, along with the Civil Rights Act, this big moment for a new democratic America. In the late 60s, starting with the NEA and moving into the 70s, we saw the grant making, one of the first and most traditional cultural policies. As local arts agencies were chartered at the city, county, and state level across the country, we saw grant programs introduced. We saw the 1% for Art ordinance created, first in Baltimore, I think third in Seattle. But public art, we started doing 1% for Art programs in the early 70s. We started doing cultural festivals in the early 1970s. We managed facilities. And most local arts agencies in America have offered some form of those four cultural policies from their inception. Almost all of them do a combination of grant making, public art, festivals, and facility management. There was also CETA, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, which employed a lot of artists in the late 1970s, much more akin to the WPA, the direct hiring of artists, which we generally don't do. Jen's right that most of this is focused on institutions versus individuals. In the early 2000s, we saw a big focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would say we still are seeing that focus, but still wrestling with it. Arts education became a big priority in the early 2000s for a lot of local arts agencies. A lot of cultural policy centered on restoring arts education to public schools, which had been largely removed based on the rise of Reaganomics and public education decisions from the 80s and 90s. And the rise in the more recent years of creative placemaking, creative economy, the creative class, looking at both planning and economic development intersections of creative work in cities. So this is sort of how cultural policy has moved. And these are the levers of policy that we're thinking about when we're thinking about how to create more racially equitable systems. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
I also want to pick up on what Randy was sort of talking about these big sort of waves of structural policy in the United States that each one of them in their own ways have reinforced discrimination in some cases and inequity in almost all cases. One of the things that this program is situated in is an earlier set of research that Grantmakers in the Arts invested in, that I was sort of the principal investigator on, but it was a collaboration, really a literature review. And this report is available publicly, and we can put the link in the chat later. A literature review and kind of series of applied interviews that really began to look at what the opportunities are in the public sector to really shift policy through an arts and cultural lens that sort of explicitly advances racial equity. And the report is long and you can read it, but I wanted to sort of tease up sort of three kind of key things that emerged as we sort of looked at the analysis of the report. One is that the public sector itself is going through a pretty radical reshifting in the next, so from now until the next 20 years, the retirement age in the public sector is quite significant. There will be a nearly 50% turnover in the employees within the public sector in the next 20 years. And that the opportunity to shift real leadership and change and new imagination in the people at the front lines of making policy in the United States is kind of right now. The second piece of that we found was that explicitly femme presenting and particularly femme presenting women of color, particularly Black and Latinx women, have disproportionately related to the private sector more leadership roles existing in the public sector. And so we actually have already situated in the government many people already leading and driving change who need investment, facilitation, and support to continue to advance their own leadership within as drivers of change. And then the last is that because of the way the public sector works at the state, local level, that oftentimes people tend to work in hyper silos, and that really one of the other levers that we should push is really around sort of building power networks at the regional and local level. So if you sort of take the massive shift that's happening in the public sector, the fact that you already have people working in that sector who are leaders and who can drive that change, but sort of they tend to lack structural supports, investment, and professionalized ways of advancing their own careers within public sector work, particularly public sector arts work, and the fact that we know that power building actually needs to occur at a hyperlocal level. One of the things that this report prompted was, what would it look like if we actually built a peer network, cohort-led learning network that was really attempted to intervene in all three of those areas, to advance leaders, to build power, and to sort of build collaboration amongst peer networks, particularly at the regional and local level. So that's what the report said.
That's the report. What about this one, Jen?
So with our co-designers over the last several months, what we have sort of begun to do is think about a learning sequence that the Cultural Policy Action Lab would have sort of two main components. One is a public learning series that which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the other is a selected cohort who would go through the public learning series together and do more intentional sort of networking, power building, and process work. The current learning sequence that we sort of mapped out with our co-designers sort of takes apart the big current public policy instruments that are most common in state and local arts agencies, and we'll have public learning sessions that will really dig into the history and particularly the inequitable history of that particular set of tools. Really think about what a new kind of policy imagination might look like if applied differently, and then offer up some specific examples of how in key places around the country that those particular public policy instruments are moving and shifting. So for example, each session would be about 90 minutes long, and each one of these components would actually have an active sort of historical, tactical, and then imagination component. And we've kind of took this apart by looking across state and local arts agencies at common things that they are doing, that sort of trying to start where people already are, and trying to figure out how we can kind of think about new ways of working together. Randy, is there anything, maybe, or Estrella, is there anything I missed?
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Jen. Estrella, do you want to talk about the cohort?
Yeah, once again, collaboratively designed with a group of national leaders and people from all different levels. We identified 3 key elements that we really wanted to focus on as some of the desired the focus and the outcomes. So for one, we want to build a national cohort. So as Jen talked about, being able to serve evolving professionals, public sector arts and culture workers, that really spans a network of different size cities, municipal kind of associations, whether they're quasi-municipal agencies, those that work collaboratively already with nonprofit organizations, those that are really kind of in their own vein. We want to be able to foster small group and individual coaching. So for the actual application process for individuals who are wanting to join the program, a part of one of the perks of not just being a part of the public programs, the public offering through the GIA website, is to be able to have that one-on-one time with a group of national coaches, as well as that peer time with each other. And then essentially the program is really designed around project-based applied learning. So it's not just going to be just deeper dives from the public offering, but it'll be, how do we address some of the real questions that you're dealing with in the communities that you're working with? What are some of the policy hurdles that are going on? Being able to kind of jump into the deep dive of what an individual is working on so that they can actually see what can be applied to become that transformational leader now and build the building blocks, set the kind of the pathway into a stronger future for their own work, as well as for the communities that they're working in.
Thank you, Estrella.
Yeah.
I think this one's you as well.
Yeah. And, just to kind of reiterate, because we understand that those who are paying attention to Grantmakers in the arts and, those of us, we do find ourselves to be very cross-sector, some in a very private setting, some in the public sector as well. But we really want to focus on those individuals who can clearly identify themselves as being public sector workers. We think it's important that these individuals do have some authorizing power, that they are managing a budget or they have insights into a budget for a particular project and program that does involve that policy implementation. Of course, as a key part of everything that we do as collaborators, especially with Grantmakers in the arts, this individual does need to show a pursuit of racial equity, not only in their own practice, but as is respected and even encouraged as part of the work that they're doing within their office, and that they do have a policy-based project that they're able to present and come to the table with. And we do have some ideas, we have examples that we want to share with you for those who maybe are like, okay, well, policy is embedded in everything that we do. We're public sector workers. Both Jen and Randy have some examples that we want to be able to share with you of what that might look like.
Thank
you, Estrella. Jen, do you want to talk about Boston?
Yeah, and so one of the things we want to be very explicit about is that this is a cohort of folks who are explicitly trying to build their policy chops. And so almost all of us on this call, I know, manage and lead programs, but we're actually trying to sort of thread the needle of people who are actually attempting to shift the underlying policy lever at which that program sits. So in this particular example, the Boston Office of Arts and Culture has initiated an artist in residence program, and many of you on this call probably lead some sort of fellowship or artist-based residence program where you fund in some way, shape, or form an artist to produce work in conjunction with an external third party, whether that's a museum or a community center, et cetera. The difference and the underlying structure in this program is that the artists are situated in ways in which they are explicitly co-designing with community an explicit intended policy outcome. And so in this particular, in one of the examples, the artists were embedded with the Public Housing Authority to really co-design sort of what a rapid reprototyping policy shift would be for immigrant, refugee, and DACA-amended individuals living in and seeking public housing in Boston. And so the underlying policy mechanism was really the part of the output of the project was actually to shift the policy lever, not just to produce something artistic. So it's an example of where, as you're thinking about applying to this program and you're thinking about what's the project I want to prototype, thinking about not just I want to do this creative placemaking project, thinking about the underlying transit, community development, housing, underlying policy structure that you are interested in shifting or moving to shift. And I also want to say this explicitly because it's really important. We also recognize that many of you are maybe coming from places where you are personally committed to racial equity and policy shifting, but the larger environment in which you are working may be complex and not as supportive of that. And we get that. And we're trying to make this a space where we know as an applicant, you might apply. And our goal is to try to create a cohort of other people who can serve as sort of a support network as you are trying to sort of lead or drive or make that policy shifting work, because we know that sometimes that feels very isolating and solo work, but wanted to just differentiate between the explicit policy kind of intent versus a particular project or program. So.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Another example of policy-oriented work is the Cultural Space Agency, which, as it says here, is a mission-driven, values-based cultural real estate development company chartered by the city of Seattle as a public development authority. It is, in terms of its outcome, it's essentially a community wealth building strategy and a vehicle for community self-determination. It is the result of a multi-year community co-design process that was done through a racial equity toolkit. And it is addressing the fact that in a city where Amazon has built 1 million square feet of new office space every year for 5 years, that has been amongst the fastest growing and most expensive cities in America for the last 10 years, and continues to have more cranes in the air than any city in North America, it's very, very expensive. And so the Office of Arts and Culture, which I was privileged to lead at the time, and I was privileged to work with my colleague, Matthew Richter, who really was the architect of this vision. We said, you know, $1 million a year capital facilities grant has a pretty diminishing return over time if the cost of living goes up by 20% every year. So what could it look like to actually create ownership, long-term ownership and stewardship of physical property to prevent displacement, particularly for BIPOC communities who we saw being pushed out and priced out of the city? What could that look like? And so this instrument was legislated. The Cultural Space Agency had to be legislated by the city council, had to be authorized by the mayor at the time. And as a public development authority, it is its own quasi-government institution. And the sort of choice that had to be made was, do we redirect an amount of this capital funding program for a period of time to start this endeavor? Do we redirect money towards a policy initiative versus grants? So it was like $1 million of grants that people didn't get. Instead, they were putting the money towards this concept. The theory being that it could have a multiplier effect. The good news is that it worked. In its first year, it is doing 7 different real estate development projects totaling 50,000 square feet of new space that will be owned by BIPOC community in Seattle, and has raised well over $15 million. So the gambit paid off in this case. This is not the case for every project or every community, but it's an example of a policy initiative that was able to get at those goals of community self-determination and community wealth building. And this will be, Jen mentioned earlier that there is the 8-part public learning series. And then separate from that, there is the cohort of practitioners, which we're talking about today. You can attend and learn more about all of these individual content areas, the 8 learning sessions, without having to be in the cohort. I say that only to say this example and others will be explored in more detail in the first session that we're going to do, because I know that's a lot of words to throw at you for this particular topic. Estrella, let's talk about the application.
Yeah, again, just reiterating, this is kind of two components to this, to the conversations around what does policy action look like in the public sector, which we're hoping to appeal not only to Grantmakers in the Arts membership and those who follow, but open to the public as a free offering. The cohort that we're trying to build is going to be up to 10 individuals, again, representing different places from across the country. The application is live and open now. I did put in the chat details about the whole program can be found at giarts.org, and that link is there. The application can be found at this link. It is pretty straightforward. There is a bit of information about who is eligible, what is the program, what are the anticipated expectations. And I'll say this, the application is free via submittable. I am happy to help anyone if they have any troubleshooting issues with that. And we do have, there are 9 short answer questions that are related to who you are, what kind of programs do you implement, what does policy look like within the work, and an example essentially of a description of that project. We do require a CV or a resume to be uploaded directly into submittable, and 2 letters of recommendation. Some of you on the call might actually be a recommender. And so this information it's not necessarily going to be about a hierarchy, but we want to be able to hear recommendation, a referral essentially about the individual's commitment to racial equity, their commitment to this kind of policy action within the public sector, and maybe even share about your experience with them. Let me think. So again, details are found at giarts.org. And wow, I was going to say one other thing and I just sort of blanked out on it, but we want to make sure that, if you have people on mind, maybe they're not even in your office, that you feel welcome to recommend for them to apply. And we're happy to, kind of guide people through, is this something for me? And this is a very new type of program. This is the first time that we're offering it. So we want to be able to guide people into the space to make sure that this is going to be a good fit for them. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Expectations, 2 perks. We do have a set regular program of Wednesdays. Once we do begin, dates are a little TBA, but we want to make sure that people understand Wednesdays are held for the programming, and for selected individuals, they will receive a stipend for program implementation. And so we do have a budget. It's a free opportunity for individuals to participate, but we do have a budget to be able to, whether it's seed funding or program implementation. We understand that, no amount of money is ever enough, but we hope that this is something that can be a starting off point for the individuals a part of this program.
Whew, we did it. We talked for 30 minutes about the Cultural Policy Action Lab, and we're going to stop the screen share so that we can see your faces or your pictures or your names, and answer any questions that you have about any of the stuff that we just covered. So feel free to use the raise hand feature, come on camera if you're willing. And that's a lot of information, and we'd love to be able to answer any questions that you have. Oh, I see a raised hand. Denise, please go ahead.
And I know that this is only 10 people, 10 people. And so are you looking at getting a spread across the nation? Regions, certain regions represented?
I'm happy to take it. Go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think we recognize this is a pilot, right? And it's a national cohort. So yes, the short answer is I think we're looking for a spread across the region. I think in a perfect world, we would be able to offer this program multiple times and potentially then hone it in at a regional level. But for this first time, I think we're kind of going through as a cohort and figuring out what it might look like to replicate it, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
And I also, the only thing I would add to that is, there are 6 people on an election panel for this who are going to be reviewing all the applicants. And I think it's really going to be about what is the mix that makes sense based on who applies. There are so many directions this could go. It could be all about placemaking. It could be all about West Coast. It could be all about the Midwest. It could be all, it could be all about state agencies. So I think we want it to be a mix. We want, and something that we didn't emphasize a ton in the presentation was Grantmakers in the Arts now is represented, fully 50% of its members are public sector members. And there is, as you know, if you're a public sector practitioner, precious few professional development opportunities in the field if you work at the intersection of public policy and arts and culture in America. So however we can do the most good, and let's keep the dialogue going, because there's more need than we can fill in a 10-slot cohort and an 8-week part learning series. So we're down to keep growing this. We just had a conversation with Grantmakers in the Arts a couple of days ago. That's what comes after this? What's 2023 look like? How do we meet the needs of our members? And the last thing I'll say, because now I'm getting excited, is we want to take advantage of the Grantmakers in the Arts conference this year. And we're talking about a pre-conference where we can have some of those big conversations. Where could this go, not just this year, but next year and beyond? What does the field really need? What do you as practitioners want to gain depth of knowledge in, and how might GIA be able to help with that? So there's a teaser.
Estee, if you still have a question, and then Lindsay.
I'm sorry, it got answered earlier. I was
great.
just gonna ask if this was something that had already been done. But yeah, overall, I'm very interested in learning more about the practice. Yeah, and that's all I have. And I'm also recently new to the arts sector and all of this. As a data nerd, I'm very interested into seeing what it is that the community itself is doing here in the States. So yeah, that's it.
We are widely accepting of policy nerds, data nerds, all nerd adjacent humans who kind of want to shift the underlying structure. So
Yeah, I just want to also reiterate, not only is GIA committed to this work, obviously, as Randy mentioned, but I think we're also committed to fostering continued, connections for individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color, who do not already have a pipeline for mentorship and coaching in this capacity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm
Sure.
excited.
Yeah, Lindsay and then Jennifer, please.
Lindsay, you're on mute. It doesn't look like you're on mute. Why don't we have Jennifer go, and then Lindsay, when your audio is back on. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi there, guys. Sorry for the craziness. I'm actually in a bar right now at a hotel, so
Nice.
with kind of sketchy service here, self-service. Yeah, I'm really interested in this program, not for me, but our city is getting ready to hopefully hire a city public Randy. We had a new mayor change a couple of months ago, back in November, who's very interested in arts and culture. So he has said that he wants to hire a cabinet level person, the title to be determined. But obviously this is something that's going to happen hopefully this spring or summer, and if everything goes well. So this program is a little premature for that person. But I'm kind of, or you gave me a little kind of funny nod. I think for the public part, this would be great. But that cohort just sounds something very interesting for the future. We will see who that person is and the details about sort of their experience level. But I'm just here to hear about sort of the public aspect of it, but also to hopefully do some planning, because this sounds perfect for a city that has not had arts and culture commissioner or manager or whatever the title will be in forever. So we're excited, but
That's
You
awesome.
know.
What
Jennifer,
city,
are you-
Jennifer?
Pardon me?
What city are you in?
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio,
Oh,
and
that's
I
awesome.
am a grant maker for the Gun Foundation. So
Awesome.
I was gonna ask if you were with Gun, Jennifer. I think I met you at the Cleveland
Mhm.
racial equity training that GIA did
right,
there
and
a
a
number
couple
of
of
years ago.
GIA,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of
One
GIA
thing-
conferences.
One thing that we talked about this a little bit, and while obviously this is focused on the public sector, there is opportunity for that public sector person or persons to partner with philanthropy, service organization. Like Gun is pretty involved in all things Cleveland from my read of it. And so maybe there's an opportunity for you to partner with someone from the mayor's office to go through this together to create something like that. And Jill, I see you also nodding. So I think, you know, the partner, each local context is going to know what it needs, however it can get to policy change can be the right way. Hopefully the person executing the change itself is in government. And actually, to your point about how exciting it is for a new agency to be chartered within government, the AIR example that artist in residence example that Jen shared from Boston. Boston is a relatively new arts agency, and Kara, who does a brilliant job running that agency, has a little bit more freedom to innovate policy because there isn't as much burden of the historical way in which things are done. You know, if organizations are used to getting their check for 40 years, it's a lot harder to redirect that money into a new policy initiative because it means less checks, unless you can get a new appropriation. But
the other reason is like the reason I was giving a little face was that I actually, you're right, like in terms of the cohort, it may be the timing is not quite right, but one of the things I wanted to reiterate is that each one of these public sessions is going to be recorded and archived, and including the Q&A, which we think is going to be really rich in the public sessions. So there's always a space for, as the mayor and you are onboarding this new person, to kind of go back to that content and also then connect with some of the people who will be sharing in the public learning series too. So we wanted to create, in the design of this program with the co-designers, we wanted to bring as many spaces in entry points into this discussion as possible, because we know people are going to come in and out in different phases of this.
Right. I mean, one thing I was just thinking is that we do have a person who is, I think, the chief strategist, their names around, to the mayor, who is going to be the one that's focusing the art program, and they're in a complete state of learning. And Jill and I and a couple other folks have been helping them sort of conceptualize what an arts agency can look like, and using a lot of, we would love to use Seattle, but I think that would probably make their heads explode. So, you know, we're looking for other cities that have some new programs to look at how to fund it, how to staff it, what kind of things, projects that they really might be. So this might be very interesting, if not the cohort, again, looking at that, you know, second in command, who will not be the arts commissioner, but will, you know, what we feel is going to be supervising or very close to that arts commissioner. Maybe they will be someone who would be very interested in checking this out. So
it's super exciting to like wave the wand and reimagine what a local arts agency might look like.
Yeah, this is building it from the ground up. So as much good stuff as we can stuff in their heads right now, the better.
Awesome. Lindsay?
Hi, thank you.
Got you. No, we had you. Oh. We had you for a second, Lindsay. When your headphones were in, we had contact.
For me.
Oh. Yeah,
Now.
gotcha.
Oh, okay. So sorry about that. So you kind of answered my question a little bit about like what point our projects are supposed to be at when we're entering this program. So maybe another question that I have is like, is there space within the workshop and the program to actually be coming back to our communities and like bouncing ideas off of them, to have a committee around it? Obviously, we aren't doing this work alone. So I was just wondering kind of what that timeline would look like for projects while we're working within the cohort, should we be accepted?
Randy, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to take that one?
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think, there's the public learning series, and then between those public learning series, we'll have kind of cohort check-ins and coaching sessions. So I think, to your point, we certainly tried to build it with porosity so that you could kind of come in at different phases of your project, take it back and workshop it. We don't have any expectation that projects are finished or complete within this hyper compressed timeline, right? It's intended to be that kind of workshopping space. So I think that it's great. And in fact, modeling co-design is actually what we want. So I think there's no intent that the project needs to be complete within the time window of this. And we're expecting it to sort of be a learning journey, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree with Jen. But one thing I think all of us probably know is that public policy can be an excruciatingly long process sometimes. And I think this is meant to get you from point A to point B, or even point A1. It's not a huge amount of money in the budget. The budget isn't that huge in general, but it's not enough money to like hire, an international consulting firm to build out $100,000 plan or anything like that. But it's enough money to like hold a community convening to reflect back what you learned, or to hire a local consultant who can help you advance it at a more highly localized level. And as like just it's to put a little skin in the game. I think we as practitioners and GIA as an organization want to believe in the people that are going to give their time to this cohort for the next 6 months or so. We should also say we're thinking like the last Wednesday in May would be the first time the cohort got together. The first Wednesday of June would be the first public session. Those are like working dates right now, and the public sessions would run like June through September, mid-September. And then there'd be, we'd like to use the GIA conference as a bit of a capstone. We're going to definitely feedback what we learn at the conference, but we'd like to actually build out something a little more robust. And, oh my God, we could be together in person, maybe, knock wood. Boy, wouldn't that be amazing to be together in person in New York?
I'm supposed to tell you that New York is back.
Good job.
Supposed to say that at every possible opportunity.
Well done.
I read something about Koreans rebuilding it, so I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear it's back.
If there aren't any further questions, there's definitely still time and room for them. I just put in the chat again the link to find more detailed information about the program, about the public offering. And I'm also going to put in the chat, if you aren't already following, I imagine you all are, but if you aren't already following, we will have more reminders and information at GIA's social media, online presence. So feel free to send the information along to those of you maybe who you're recommending other individuals in collaborative cities or programs. We'd love to have a nice representation. And so absolutely feel free to share widely. We're ready for it.
Any other? Oh, Paul.
Hi there, everyone. I guess I've got a very kind of specific question about eligibility. I work for Urban Artworks, which is a nonprofit that's existed in Seattle for about 25 years, creating public art and youth programs and whatnot. And we're not a government agency per se, but we partner with a lot of municipalities. And me and a small team have been working on some policy recommendations for the anti-graffiti code in Seattle specifically that was written in the 90s, and kind of researching different cities and whatnot, and some kind of progressive ideas to create a more productive situation with graffiti in cities and whatnot. And I guess kind of curious if it might be a good fit for like myself as Urban Artworks, or if it would be better for me to like get a partner from like the city agency to do something like that.
That's a great question. My opinion would be to find a public art staff or local arts agency staff who could make that change in partnership with you. But you could go through the cohort together. You you as a team could be one of the cohort people. And that could be like Amy Nguyen, who runs the public art program in Seattle, or Kelly Pajek at For Culture, the county arts agency, or sometimes smaller suburban communities are actually easier to do the policy change in. Cities that have a city manager have a more efficient, it's not always for the better, but they have a more efficient way of making decisions and making policy change versus like a strong mayor system. So I think it would make more sense to have a public policy partner, because we are trying to center it on the policy side, but that isn't to say you couldn't do it. And regardless of whether you go through the cohort, you could do the learning labs, the public labs, and one of them is specifically about public art and public art policy, and how can public art be more racially equitable as a field. And I think that graffiti, that's a really great example of the kind of policy change that I think could come out of this project. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jen.
I was going to reinforce with Randy. I think the core of the design of the program is really for people who are working in governments, right? Because there's so few opportunities for them, those people who are trying to make that change within their own structures to advance that. So I think that Randy's right. I think thinking about how you might work with a local or regional or even state. I mean, although most graffiti policy is local and municipally centered.
Yeah.
So
the State Department of Transportation is their whole other, they do have their own kind of policy too, but I've been talking with a couple council members and have some suggested code kind of revisions and whatnot, but saw this opportunity and it seemed like it might be a good connection to jumpstart.
Good deal.
Yeah, definitely worth keeping the conversation going too. Thank you, Paul. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Ashley.
Hello.
New York is back.
Hi, everyone. New York is back. Contrary to everything you may have heard. Just kidding. A question that I have is like kind of a logistical one, which is, does the participating agency need to have like an active membership with GIA? And I ask that because I would need to do some research on my end to see if that's actually true for ours.
Well, GIA is currently not charging for public sector members. So if you're not, you can be pretty easily.
Okay.
I'm going to say no, because you'll become a member if you're not already a member.
Okay.
And obviously, I think GIA wants to serve its membership, but it's also grown its public sector membership tremendously by virtue of not charging public sector members. And then a lot of them found a lot of value in GIA. So when they do start charging again, people are willing to pay for it.
Terrific. Thank you.
I should probably verify that with Eddie and Nadia, but yeah, I think the answer is no. But yeah,
Guess what? Randy just made a policy decision.
Yeah, too bad I recorded this and it's going to live on their website. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, Cheryl. The GIA waived public sector membership fees in 2020 and 2021 to recognize the sort of impact the pandemic was having on public sector members. They did start charging them again, but it's worth it. I ran an agency for 8.5 years. GIA was like among the best resources, if not the best resource we had.
Anyone else? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Cheryl, for clarifying that. So I think that they're not, yeah.
They will at some point charge again. I know that wasn't meant to be a forever waiving of the fee, but the Action Lab concept was a little bit born out of that decision, in that we can give people free membership, but let's ask them to help us figure out how we provide service to those members, right? I was, as we all know, the opportunities are limited. So what else, what's the need, and what else could GIA do to advance the need, or resolve the need, not advance the need. You don't want to grow the need, you want to resolve it. Yes, Cheryl. I think where we landed with the co-designers was it's going to be project based. So if there's more than one person involved in the project the policy that you're putting forward, and it's multiple people in your local context, I think that's okay. We will have to be thoughtful about the construction of the cohort itself, because if each project if there's 10 projects and each project brings 3 people, that's a 30-person cohort. That's pretty big. So, you know, maybe we'll do less individual projects, but allow for more people. But yes, you could definitely, and you know, I think as Jen said earlier, this is a pilot, this is an experiment. And so put forward what is going to work for you. And then we will work to figure out how to accommodate the different contexts.
Yeah. Yeah, these are great questions. And so and if, you know, if we get 900 applicants, maybe we'll have to ask for multiple cohorts, but we designed around this one idea, not just kind of understanding what the interest and demand would look like.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
Any last questions? Applications are due the what, Estrella, 29th?
Yep, March 29th.
Yep.
And that gives people a little bit of a weekend if they need to spend that time to do so. And yeah, information is there at giarts.org. And I did put our emails in the chat.
It looks like someone else raised their hand. Annis, maybe? Anise?
Annis, yes, thanks. I did just have one question on the letters of recommendation. Are there like requirements on like where those are coming from? Like, no.
No, we wanted to be very careful about power positionality within agencies and understand that some of you are working in agencies that may not have supervisor support. If selected, we have a little form just sort of saying your supervisor knows you're doing this, so that they're kind of making sure it's okay for you to leave. But like we wanted to recognize that people are coming from different levels of support in their own organizations. So. Yes, leave virtually during the day. Sorry, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. So some of the public learning sessions will happen during work hours. So I think the only thing is you're thinking about this, is this something that you feel like you'll be able to get sort of permission to take time to do during the workday is the question.
And Estrella mentioned this earlier, but we are holding 11 to 2 Pacific time, which is 2 to 5 Eastern time, and I think is 9 to noon Hawaii time. So we tried to find a window that would be during the whole country's workday, so that you can be compensated for your time. Yeah.
And hopefully the good work. I put in the chat, this will be work. And it's work worth doing and absolutely worth doing while you are on the clock.
And what was, you know, something that was surprising in our co-design process was just how much of an appetite there is for a community of practice around this stuff. Just to even be able, like, I so appreciate being able to do this with Jen and Estrella on the regular, and with the co-designers, and with Eddie and Nadia at GIA. And I'm really excited to like see that circle grow and to normalize conversations about collaborative policy development that center racial equity. I think that's just an exciting shift in the world.
Randy, if I could add in, this is Jill, also in Cleveland, but at the public funder, where I'm excited about this too, you know, if it lands at our city, hopefully, or we'll see, is this idea of actually talking with other public sector leaders, because I think we're in so many discussions with other LAAs or whatever they're called, but they have so much more flexibility, particularly when we're talking about race. Yeah. And we're just in these confines that are different. And so I'm looking at Ashley, so hopefully I can meet you more online, but it's, we've found we're like developing other sub threads with people that are public sector folks through AFTA and other places, because it just is different when you're at a public agency and when you're in a government setting. So I'm excited about that piece. For sure. And it also makes me feel like it's the next step. We've done some work with Michael Rode and his whole CP Learning Lab stuff. I don't know if some of you, but what I like about this is it feels maybe similar in some intent, but it takes it to operationalizing it and like embedding it in policy, which I think that's what we weren't necessarily able to do when we did the Learning Lab program here in Cleveland the last couple of years. So I'm excited to see, maybe Jennifer and I are going to, we're already trading notes about how we can figure out someone to apply.
That's great.
We also, for what it's worth, I mean, one of our co-designers was Pam Bro, who's an absolute legend, and incredible human, incredible thinker, runs the National Association for State Arts Agencies. And it's a very different context. If you're, I can do wacky policy in Seattle because we're a dark blue dot in a light blue state. If you're in a more conservative place, they just did an RFP around the Ohio Arts Council, right? And like the state of Ohio has different conversations about racial equity than the state of New York, for example. So,
Conversations, you mean telling us it's illegal to have them?
Yeah,
that is one.
yes.
That is one public policy
Yes.
approach that is done in some places.
Yeah.
But I think we have to sort of run at that reality and be like, okay, so what we're hoping to get to in the cohort is, how do you map the authorizing environment? How do you build and translate power both up and down within a government structure? How do you practice translational leadership? What's the way in which you can present your arguments that can navigate more conservative policy environments? That's the place where there is no training room where that happens, or at least I'm not aware of very many. So that's where we really want to go with the cohort itself.
We also want to keep the cohort, I want to be very clear that we want to keep the cohort open to state and local and quasi-municipal, because authorization of different types of policy structures happens at all of those different levels. And we think it's really important for municipal folks to sort of be in dialogue with state folks, because often the legislature is setting a policy that then the municipality is or is not implementing. So, it's going to be like a messy soup of policy making, but that's actually the rigor that we need to have in order to make the change, because otherwise we're sort of just consistently pushing the same ineffective and inequitable structures down a field versus sort of saying, why can't we reimagine this whole thing, right? Which is easier said than done, but requires the saying with a group of collaborators. I think in my report, we refer to these people as the quiet catalyst class, like the people inside systems trying to shove and move change. And often it's a very lonely space. And so we're trying to make it less lonely through this process.
Well, we are about 2 minutes over time. This has been awesome. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for engaging. I think you've all helped to improve the pilot already. Thanks for being with us. Stay tuned. GIA will be the main communication channel for this, but you can expect to see the first public learning series at the beginning of April. Or why did I say that? Beginning of June, and we will be trying to do cohort selection pretty quickly after the close of the window at the end of March. So, and feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk more to and with any of you. Thank you for making time. All right, Estrella and Jen, should I pull the plug and we'll go to our other room to meet? Okay. Bye, everybody.
Don't forget